If you are a self help podcaster, I've got great news for you because I'll be sharing with you the law of success for self help podcasters today. Let me first give you some generalities so we have a clear idea what we're speaking about. The thing is that self help podcasts have gained immense popularity recently as a convenient and accessible source of info and support for individuals seeking to improve their mental well being, seeking to improve their physical well being, or seeking to improve their emotional well being. And we've seen a surge in popularity since COVID. Okay, I mean, all of a sudden, basically, folks were home and folks needed to have something to stay mentally fit. Okay, so if you think about a self help podcast, I want you to think about a podcast that delves into various subjects, including anxiety, depression, self care, and relationships. And this podcast provides listeners with a wealth of knowledge from self help professionals, inspiring personal stories, and also actionable advice. I want to insist on that. Actionable. Okay. The advice can't be just a regular blah, blah, blah. It has to be actionable. So whether it's learning about effective coping mechanisms, understanding the complexities of self-help issues, or even simply gaining a new perspective, this podcast offer a valuable resource for anyone looking to prioritize their mental health. So if you are going to do self-help, remember that your audience primarily is interested in improving their mental health. Okay. Now, why should you start a self-help podcast this year? Well, one thing for sure, podcasting allows you to reach a wider audience, including people who cannot attend in-person therapy sessions. Podcasts are listened to by a diverse group of people, including those of different ages, genders, and ethnicities. And this is across multiple geographies, multiple countries, okay? Podcasting gives you a platform to educate the public about self-help and wellness topics and share your expertise and insights. Those podcasts offer a unique and intimate form of content that allows it for a deeper level of engagement with listeners. So that's kind of cool. And podcasting as a platform can be a valuable tool for marketing your practice and attracting new clients. This is kind of similar to blogging, okay? So that you can showcase your personality and knowledge, helping you build the know, like, trust factor with your audience. You can also connect and network with other professionals in your field. And the cool also is that podcasting creates an archiving repository, so you can create content that can be accessed at any time and listened to at the listener's convenience. So that's really powerful too. So if you're thinking about the law of success for self-help podcasters, here are the steps I want you to pay attention to. The first law of success for self-help podcasting revolves around your niche. You got to be really, really specific, very strategic, but more importantly, very thorough. If you remember, I said to you that when it comes to self-help, you're talking about a variety of topics from mental health to anxiety to depression to self-care and so on and so forth. So you want to really identify which niche you want to focus on. If you want to be a successful self-help podcaster, you can't just be an all-in-one self-help podcast. No, you got to be you got to niche down. For instance, you can say, you know what, I discuss depression, or I discuss how to improve, how to get yourself back after a depression episode, or I want to discuss mental health in your 20s, or mental health in your marriage, or mental health in your relationship. You gotta be niche down. Why? Because nowadays your audience is actually bombarded by lots of topics, lots of options. So without a niche, you're not really appealing to anybody per se. Okay. So identify your niche and target audience. You got to ask yourself what kind of content you want to create. Who is your ideal listener? What kind of format do you envision for your self-help podcast? Okay, that's important. So once you have a clear idea of what you want to achieve with your self-help podcast, you can choose your name and start planning your content as well as episode format. So the second law of success for self-help podcasters actually has to revolve around the name. So first law of success, find your niche. Second law of success, choose your name. You might think, well, this is a very trivial. It's not trivial. Again, self-help podcast actually a self-help podcast is a very intimate, is a very conversational sort of podcast type, and your audience usually is very vulnerable, or at least trying to really combat their vulnerability. They're trying to fix their vulnerability, so they will trust. They will trust whatever you say as long as you can show authority, you can show thought leadership, and you can show accountability. So the name actually will convey to your target audience what your self-help podcast is all about. So when choosing a self-help podcast name, it's important to consider four things, and I want you to really write them down. The name of your self-help podcast should be relevant to the self-help topic and content of your podcast. It should really give listeners an idea of what self-help content you'll be talking about and what they can expect to learn from listening, not only now but also over time. Okay, so there has to be an element of scalability. So that's the first thing. The name should be relevant to the topic of self-help and also the content of your podcast. The second thing is that the name of your self-help podcast should be distinctive and easy to remember. When it comes to self-help podcasting, you are speaking about, again, a very intimate sort of podcasting type. So if you're not distinctive, if you're not trying to differentiate yourself, you are going to really swim in a sea of competition. So you want the name to stand out among the many other self-help podcasts available. So it should also be unique and not too similar to existing self-help podcast names. You also want to check whether the name is already taken by searching the title on major podcast platforms. Try to keep it concise and to the point, because long, complicated names can be difficult for listeners to pronounce, remember, and search for. Third, you want the name for your self-help podcast to be consistent with your self-help podcast overall branding and message. You want it to align with the tone and style of your self-help content. And finally, you want the name to be SEO friendly. Try to include keywords that will help listeners find a self-help podcast when searching, let's say, for relevant topics. The third law of success for self-help podcasting has to really be around the gear. See, the whole thing is, you might think, oh, well, the gear is not really that important because I'll be talking about very deep topics, and folks are really interested in the topics, not about the quality of the equipment. Hey, listen, the quality of your equipment is going to reflect in the sound, is going to reflect in the image if you're doing videos. Okay, so that's why it's important to get good gear. You need to choose equipment and software for recording and editing your self-help podcast, especially if you are having a group session, if you're having guests, if you're having, let's say, if you want to convey a collaborative environment where the audience can participate in sessions. You got to have the right equipment. You can start recording by just using your iPhone, that's for sure, but you can slowly improve your equipment over time. Just make sure that you pay attention to a few things. And you gotta constantly ask your audience for feedback. What do they like? What do they not like? Okay, and then you can take it from there. So a good microphone is always advisable, because poor sound quality can deter people from listening to your self-help podcast, or even your podcast in general, all kinds of podcasts. This advice is not just for self-help podcasting. This is for podcasting in general. Now, editing removes any unwanted noise or mistakes from the audio and allows you to add music or sound effects. This is one thing I've never been able to master. So you can outsource actually this stage of production. The thing is that you want to know what you're good at, and the things where you are better off actually outsourcing. So podcast editors can be hired cheaply via, let's say, Fiverr.com or Upwork.com or freelancer.com. Okay. But what you want to do is, if you are trying to really have a scalable, very successful self-help podcast, you want to build a working relationship with an editor you trust. Okay, that way you can really work over multiple episodes with that editor. It's just better as opposed to just changing every now and then. The fourth law of success, the first for self-help podcasting, has to be around publication and promotion. Let me explain. You want to publish and promote. You have to promote your self-help podcast. Otherwise, you're not going to reach the audience that you could potentially reach. You have to remember, nowadays, podcasting is very popular, very competitive. You have hundreds of thousands of podcasts, if not millions of podcasts. So you are really swimming in a very competitive sea. Okay, your self help podcast is not the only one your audience is actually exposed to. So if you want them to listen to yours, you have to do a little bit of promotion. Okay, and the thing is, you want to publish and promote your podcast through the avenues that your audience might resonate with. Okay, you need to choose a platform to host your podcast, such as a SoundCloud, Simplecast, Castos, or Podbean. You have a lot of them. You have Riverside also. And so you simply need to upload your audio files and create an RSS feed for your self-help podcast. And the cool thing is, you want the RSS to be linked to the key topics, the keywords that you want to really promote, or you want to be associated with. You want your self-help podcast to be associated with. You also need to promote the show on social media, through your website, and by reaching out to others in your network or niche. So when I speak about social media, if you want to promote your self-help podcast on social media, think about the appropriate social media platform for your specific self-help podcast. Is Facebook the best? Is TikTok the best? So TikTok is actually good for you if your self-help podcast is trying to attract a younger audience. Okay, if you go for Facebook, if you want to have a general audience, or you can also go for Twitter, now called X, or you can just go to Instagram or Pinterest. So you have to see what platform works for you, and what platform where your audience generally hangs out at. The final law of success for self-help podcasting has to do with podcast sponsorship. So if you want to really create a scalable self-help podcast, you have to really refine the avenues for revenue, the different avenues for revenue. You got to think about it. You got to think about this in a scalable manner. You got to think about this in a long-term view. Okay, that's going to help you big time. So podcast sponsorship can be a very lucrative revenue stream for self-help podcasters, but also podcasters in general. One thing I want you to really remember is that if you are trying to be a successful self-help podcaster, you have to understand it takes time to build your audience and in turn become an attractive option for sponsors, because those sponsors are going to look at the math. They're going to look at the economics of your self-help podcast. So basically, it might take years actually before you get your first sponsor, depending on the niche, on the self-help niche that you're in. Some niche are quicker than others. It depends also the geography that you are covering. Okay, so just be aware of that. It takes time. Also, getting sponsorship for your self-help podcast depends on several factors, such as the size of your audience, the niche of your self-help podcast, and the level of engagement with your listeners. So self-help podcasters with large engaged audiences can really command higher rates for sponsorships, while those with smaller or less engaged audiences may have to work harder to find sponsors and negotiate actually favorable deals. Additionally, and this is an important element to think about, the market for self-help podcast sponsorships is actually growing. And as more companies recognize the potential of, let's say, self-help podcast advertising, is actually becoming easier for self-help podcasters to secure sponsorship deals, no matter the size of your audience. Okay. So if this is one of your goals, make sure you have a unique and valuable proposition to offer potential sponsors this year. So let me give you a few extras here. So if you have a successful self-help, I mean, if you're looking to create a successful self-help podcast and you want to gain subscribers and get reviews, this has to be part of your vision right off the bat. In other words, you have to really ask your followers on social media to leave reviews for you. Of course, you have to incentivize them, okay, for them to leave reviews, but reviews are going to help you big time. But you also, because those reviews are going to help you also gain subscribers. So the little subscribers that you have, if they leave reviews, those reviews will be read by other potential subscribers who really will subscribe to your show afterwards. Okay, that's an important element. So one thing I want to say here is that your journey to starting a self-help podcast will depend on your background, will depend on your vision, will depend on where you want to go, how far you want to take this itinerary, this project. Okay, one thing for sure, when you actually start podcasting about self-help, remember that you're doing something for yourself too. Okay, you are caring for yourself. So if you think about self-help, I want you to think about self-care as well, okay? Because basically, if you're talking to folks about self-help, you will be getting some suggestions too. You'll be because this is a very conversational podcast topic, okay? You will talk to either guests, or you talk to your followers, or you talk to group of people, okay? And basically, podcasting about self-help can be more about your learning than your expertise. In other words, be ready to be humble. Don't say, I know it all and I'm coming to the market with my solutions. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to be open to hear from others, to hear different feedback, different opinions. Okay, that's an important element, because the whole thing is that you are able to get things done by listening to other points of view also, and also you are able to become better as a podcaster, because starting a self-help podcast can improve your ability to be vulnerable, your ability to talk to others, your ability to understand what happens in other people's lives. It's a give and take. Okay, it's a win-win situation, but it's really a mutually beneficial, let's say, equation. Okay, so it's one of those things where you have to understand that it is a process, it is a journey, and only you know where you want to go. Okay, so if you think about actually succeeding as a self-help podcaster this year, remember that everything lies in the preparation, lies in the vision, and lies in the hard work. You have to really get at it every single day. You have to work, and you got to have clear goals. You got to have a vision board or some kind of mental goalpost that will actually steer you to where you want to go. So as a coda into this conversation, I'll share with you the law of success for self-help podcasters. So I give you the generalities, the steps, the extras, and now the coda. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.